Hey guys, Will here. So in front of me we have 3 of the current 6 wheels in the GSI lineup. The X-29, the Formula Pro Elite V2 and the Hyper P1. So in today's video we're going to be focusing on the X-29, and in the next video we'll take a look at the Hyper P1 and the FPE V2. So the X-29, as you can probably tell by looking at it, is quite a bit cheaper than these other 2 alternatives. And the philosophy here is to provide a high-end experience without some of the extended features that you'll find on the more expensive wheels. So in today's video, I'm going to take you through all the things that I think you need to know about the X-29 and compare it to some of the other alternatives that we've tested in the past as well, to hopefully help you guys determine which one is going to be the best option for your sim rig. So let's dive in. All right, so just quickly before we get started today, firstly, a couple of housekeeping things just so you have the full context of exactly what we're doing today. So firstly, big thank you to GSI for sending across these 3 wheels for us to check out. Now we will be, as part of today's video and the video on the P1 and FPE V2, be cross-comparing against quite a few other wheels just to give you a better picture of what might suit you best. So it's important that you're aware that all the wheels that we're looking at in today's video have all been sent to us under the exact same conditions as the GSI wheels. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video, or any other sim racing gear, you can head over to boostedmedia.net, and there you will find a whole bunch of discount codes and affiliate links. So we do very much appreciate your support there if you are in the market for any sim racing gear. But as is always the case here at Boosted Media, no third party has any kind of input whatsoever into today's video. Everything I'm going to be talking about is purely just my own observations and my own opinions of these products. So with that said, let's dive in, firstly talking about pricing here on the X-29 wheel. Now, as I alluded to in the intro, the idea here is to provide a high-end experience. So all the materials, all the touch points, all the interactions that you'll have with this wheel all do feel very similar, if not the same, as the much more expensive wheels that you see on either side. But obviously the feature set is reduced down. So whether or not you need those features, well, that's something that we're going to help you determine throughout today's video as well. But obviously the price point here is a lot lower than what you're looking at on the 2 wheels on the side. So pricing for the X-29 starts from $650 US. That doesn't include any taxes, shipping costs, or import duties. So just make sure you do your research there to make sure that you're not going to come up against any unexpected costs. We do have a 5% discount code available for GSI as well, so make sure that you check that out if you are looking at picking one of these up. Worth noting as well that there are bundles available with SimuCube wheelbases both on the GSI website and the SimuCube website. That is a really good way of saving yourself a significant amount of money if you are looking at buying a wheelbase at the same time, so definitely check that out. Now, you may have noticed I said starting from $650 US. The version that we have on the table in front of us does have the upgrade of 2 clutch paddles, analog clutches, and those have aluminium paddles on them. So once you factor that in, you're looking at $845 US for the wheel. There is also the option of carbon fiber paddles for all 4 of the paddles on the wheel, and that will set you back $895 if you go for that option. So there are a couple of different configuration options there available depending on your personal preference. The upgrade from aluminium to carbon fiber doesn't have any significant impact on the actual driving experience. Both are plenty rigid enough. So really that's purely just going to be a cosmetic upgrade. Doesn't make a significant difference to weight in the greater scheme of things. And obviously you'll just need to decide for yourself whether you want to have analog clutches or not. Pretty significant saving if you decide that you don't want to have those analog clutches. So definitely worth seriously considering that. Don't just assume that you are going to want them. So straight off the bat here, I think one of the things that really stands out about this wheel is that the overall quality of the user experience, the quality of the touch points, the materials that they've used for the build, does sort of put it in the category of some wheels that are a lot more expensive than this. Now, it may not be quite as feature rich as some of those wheels, but I do think it is worth just doing a little bit of a comparison here. So if we look at something like the Grid Engineering MPX wheel, for example, this wheel does have a couple of additional buttons. You can see the thumb encoders on here as well. Now, we do have full reviews of all the wheels that we're comparing here, so I'm not going to go and do a full review of every single thing in today's video. Of course, you can go and check out those reviews for more details. But just to give you a basic picture of the build quality differences here between the 2, there's not really a whole lot in it. You can see a genuine carbon fiber faceplate here on the Grid MPX wheel, whereas we're aluminium on the X-29. But look, in terms of the quality and the look that it actually has on the rig and how it feels in your hands, there really isn't a massive difference between the 2. And when you consider that the Grid wheel comes in at $1,199 US, and again, just obviously check local taxes, import duties, shipping costs and whatnot there for a more accurate comparison depending on where you are in the world. But you can see how this starts to look like really good value for money. Now, comparing to something like the Asher Race replacing Artura wheel or even their F64 wheel if you want to go for something a little bit more feature rich again. These, again, are relatively similar build quality overall. The look and the feel in your hands, again, is pretty similar. Maybe a little bit more premium, a little bit more high-end here, just with things like the brushed aluminium and so forth. But yeah, look, I mean, there's not a massive amount of difference in it, feature set aside. And again, you can check out full reviews of both of these wheels right here on the channel too. So for the F64 V3 wheel, you're looking at €1,099. Now that does include 19% VAT, that particular price. So just make sure you are doing a direct comparison between prices here, not forgetting about the taxes. And then if you're looking at something like the Artura wheel, that guy comes in at €1,129, again, including that 19% VAT. Now, again, both of these do have thumb encoders. The thumb encoder positioning on the F64 is a little bit awkward. I actually prefer the overall user experience with the Artura wheel for that reason. It's just a little bit more comfortable. But again, check out our full reviews of these wheels if you are wanting more details on those. But as you can see, overall, very similar in terms of build quality. The quality of the switchgear is all very good throughout in all cases. So let's set these guys aside again quickly now. A couple of other cheaper options just to quickly run through here as well. The Cube Controls F-Core, which we rated very highly in terms of value for money up until the SimMagic GT Neo came out, at least. So the F-Core, that is going to set you back, what is it, €555.99. Again, just check out local taxes and shipping costs and so forth for that guy. Very similar feature set overall here. I actually prefer the overall look and feel of the GSI wheel, but that is subjective. You do have the addition of thumb encoders on this wheel. This wheel doesn't have the LED lighting features that you have with the GSI wheel. So again, just check out the full review for a more accurate comparison here. But this guy is likely to come in a little bit cheaper than the X-29 is for a similar overall user experience, I would say. And then we've got the GT Neo from SimMagic. So we are dealing with a carbon reinforced plastic construction in this case. So it doesn't have that same premium feel and you know, overall look and quality that you're getting with some of these other wheels that we've looked at here. But when you consider the price point here, you're looking at just $289 US. Again, just check your local taxes, shipping costs and whatnot with this wheel too. But yeah, significantly cheaper than what you're looking at with any of these other wheels here. And look, the overall feature set and the overall driving experience isn't all that dissimilar, all things considered. And there are actually a couple of features on this wheel that you don't get on some of those other wheels as well. So check out the full review of that guy as well. But it is definitely one that I would suggest at least considering before you fork out for some of these more expensive wheels, including the X-29. So check out full review of that for more details. But look, that's a basic rundown on some of the other wheels that I would at least consider before jumping in and buying one of these. And of course, there are a lot of other wheels out there as well that we haven't tested here at Boosted Media before. So make sure that you are checking out other people's reviews as well, just to make sure that you're getting the absolute full picture and making the best possible decision for you. So yeah, that gives you a quick rundown on some of the other options that are available and some of the pricing comparison. Let's now drill into this guy in more detail, take you through its features, build quality, materials, and all of those important things. Then we'll get into how the software side of things works and of course the driving experience. So we have a diameter here of 290 millimeters, which sits at pretty square in the sweet spot, in my opinion, for maximum versatility of a wheel of this kind of style. Now, obviously you're not going to be doing drifting or rally style driving or anything like that with a butterfly style wheel, but somewhere in that sort of 290 to 300 millimeter range is where I feel most comfortable driving the widest variety of different cars that you might want to be driving with a wheel of this kind of style. Now, if you compare to something like the Fanatec wheels, for example, those are 270 millimeter. That's lower diameter does make cars tend to feel a little bit more twitchy and overly responsive, at least in my opinion. The wider you go with the diameter, the more it kind of softens your inputs, and it will also have an impact on the force feedback as well. So force feedback feels a little bit less sharp with a wider diameter. And yeah, I just find somewhere within that 290 to sort of 300, 310 millimeter range tends to be the most comfortable for me. So I think that's a good design choice there. Now, while we're on that subject, another really important factor here is the grips. Now, you guys have heard me say a million times now that I'm not a big fan of rubberized grip material that tends to pick up dirt and debris and feel kind of sticky and tacky in your hands. Now, I'm very happy to report that in the case of the X-29 and the two other wheels that we were looking at in the next video, they've absolutely nailed this grip material, at least in my subjective opinion. Now, the reason I say that is because it's got that same sort of squishiness and, you know, nice solid feeling in your hands as a lot of the other wheels that we've tested, but this stuff doesn't pick up dirt and debris like the other wheels do, and it doesn't have that sticky, clammy feeling to it either. It's got this kind of soft, texture to it. And look, to me at least, it feels absolutely fantastic. Doesn't really sort of reduce the amount of grip that you have at all, but it just doesn't have that clammy feeling. Now if I bring in the MPX wheel again, you can see the grip material does look very similar here, but you can see how this is all covered in dirt and debris, and it just feels sticky in your hands. It's just not a comfortable feeling. Now, obviously with gloves on, that's not really a consideration at all. You know, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, for those of you who like to drive with bare hands, yeah, I do really rate this grip material. One thing I did notice, however, is that when I put extended use on these wheels, and it didn't happen immediately, I did find that the grip material did start to rub off on my hands a little bit. I ended up with black stains around the touch points, so around my index finger and thumb, and then a little bit on the palm of my hand where it rubs against the bottom too. Now, in the case of the FPE V2 wheel, which is the one that I put the most usage into, you can actually see it's starting to show a visible sign of wear there. Now, granted, this probably has a good 50 or 60 hours of use in it now. I haven't put the same amount of usage into the X-29 or the Hyper P1, simply because I just really love driving with the FPE V2. But yeah, you can see some visible signs of wear and tear on that grip material. And obviously, you know, if it's leaving residue behind on your hands, it's got to be coming from somewhere. So look, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a major complaint by any means. It's certainly not wearing down or changing the feeling at all, but yeah, just something that I did notice. So I obviously wanted to point that out to you guys so that you are aware. But yeah, look, I mean, that aside, absolutely love this grip material, and it is ergonomically really nice and chunky, really good, comfortable feeling in the hands. Yeah, I can't rate these grips highly enough. I really do love what they've done here. One other thing you will notice is there is just a slight seam around the edges of the grip. You can feel that with bare hands, but it's certainly not sharp or anything that's going to irritate you. It definitely has worn down as I've put more hours into these wheels. So yeah, very comfortable ergonomically, absolutely no complaints there whatsoever. Very rigid as well. There's absolutely no noticeable twist in the wheel at all, and that is down to the fact that they've used a single piece of aluminium, as you can see here, the seam across the front here. So that single piece extends throughout the entire faceplate of the wheel and behind the grip materials as well, and the grips are kind of molded onto that, so the grips aren't replaceable. Now it is also an aluminium back shell here as well. I'm not 100% certain on whether it's CNC machined or cast. It does kind of have a look like it might be cast, but yeah, don't quote me on that one. But either way, absolutely no issues with rigidity there whatsoever. Now in terms of weight as well, it is very well balanced. It feels like the weight is primarily sort of in the middle at the front, so it does tend to sort of want to center itself on the rig rather than sort of try to flop to the side or anything like that. So it is very comfortable to use in regards to that as well. Weight wise, if you're looking at the version that comes with just the shifter paddles without the clutches, you're looking at 1.13 kilograms. With the 4 paddles, that jumps up to 1.25 kilograms. So it's certainly not the lightest wheel that we've tested, but certainly not overly heavy either. Now I do actually tend to prefer slightly heavier wheels, even though that does have a slight damping effect on the force feedback. Obviously, the more rotating mass you have, the more it's going to dampen things down. But personally, I've just always preferred wheels that feel a little bit more hefty and substantial in hand. It's just a subjective preference that I have. Let me know in the comments down below whether you agree or disagree with that subjective preference. So let's have a little chat now about buttons and inputs. Now they've done something a little bit different from what we're used to seeing on other wheels that we've tested in the past. So these particular buttons are UV printed rather than stickered. So what that means is that they do come as they come. Now you can swap them around if you open up the wheel and kind of pull things apart. You can actually swap the caps out if you want to change positions, but you can see they have actually labeled all these buttons with laser etching on the actual faceplate of the wheel too. So they don't include a sticker sheet or anything like that. Now I'm sure third-party companies will come up with, if they haven't already, overlays for the wheel to change things up a little bit. But yeah, look, the reason they've gone with these screen printed buttons rather than stickers is that they have a much more high quality feel overall. You don't have the issue of the backlight kind of shining through in irregular patterns or anything like that either. The stickers aren't going to move around or miss a line or anything like that. And it just has a much more premium look and feel overall, at least in my opinion. So the trade-off is that you don't have quite the same level of customization, but for me personally, I think that it's a worthwhile trade-off, particularly because the buttons that they've actually put here do make sense. You know, it always annoys me when you've got something like a drink button or something like that that's, you know, physically labeled and you can't change it, because, you know, you don't need a drink button in a sim rig. But, you know, this all makes sense. You've got a light flash, you've got a mute, you've got an enable, left, right, up, down, reset, radio, and pit limiter. So, you know, those are the kinds of functions that that you're likely to want to have in those positions anyway. So I don't really have a major complaint about it, but let me know in the comments down below what you think about this particular design choice. Now the buttons themselves have a really nice tactile, snappy feel to them. 500 grams of force required to activate them, and quite similar in feeling to what you find on the F-Core wheel, for example, or some of the more high-end Cube Controls wheels. A little bit less squishy than what you have on something like the Grid MPX wheel. I would say that I do slightly prefer the feeling of the switches on the Grid MPX, but you are of course paying a lot more money for that privilege. So look, not enough in it that I would say it's worth the upgrade based on that alone. Absolutely no complaints with regards to the switches, and they do all feel nice and uniform across as well. Now there is of course LED lighting available here too, and that is fully customizable. You can have it react to button presses, react to track status, or have them flash when cars are on either side of you, all those kinds of features. We'll get into more detail on that when we get into the software a little bit later on. But yeah, fully customizable RGB backlighting for all of these push buttons on the face of the wheel. We then have two 7-way multi-position switches here. So we have rotary encoder functionality, push button, left, right, up and down, and two of those. Always a fan of wheels that have two of these, simply because it makes it nice and easy to assign one of these for navigating through the black box when you're in game, and then also assigning the other one to navigate through menus and things, so you don't have to use your keyboard and mouse when you are setting up your game. So good to see that. So relatively clearly defined detents in each position on the rotary encoder, and even though it does look quite, springy and floppy here on camera, I'm sure it is quite a solid feeling to it. Some other 7-way switches that we found on some wheels, just are really floppy and, just don't have a lot of tactile feel to them at all. No complaints here whatsoever. Subjectively, I would have preferred if they didn't have the GSI logos on them, simply because there's already a GSI logo there and there and there and there and there, and we might count the number of logos that are on this a little bit later. So it's a little bit over the top, maybe. Would look a little bit cleaner without it, but again, that is a subjective thing. I do like the fact that they've included these shrouds around the buttons as well. It does make it less likely that you're going to accidentally press a button, and it makes it a little bit easier to feel exactly where you are when you're driving in VR as well. The positioning of these buttons is very good ergonomically too, but we'll get into that when we get into the driving experience a little bit later on. We then have 3 rotary encoders on the front of the wheel as well. These do have quite a few functions, and again, we'll cover that in software later on, but nice, clearly defined clicks in each position. Absolutely no issues operating these with or without gloves. Some wheels that we've tested in the past do tend to be a little bit on the stiff side when you're driving without gloves, but these are absolutely fine. We do have push button functionality here as well. So again, we'll unpack that in more detail when we get into software a little bit later on, but you do have the option here of a press and turn for a second function rather than just the primary function. So what you can do is, say for example, if you want to adjust traction control 1, you might just turn it in either direction. If you want to adjust traction control 2, you can push and turn at the same time, and that will give you that second function. So quite a nice little feature there. And that is everything that you have on the front of the wheel. So no RPM strip or anything like that, but you can of course have the LEDs in the push buttons react to any sort of telemetry data that you want, depending on your preference. And that is all done through the SimHub software, as you'll see a little bit later on. So let's flip the wheel around now and take a look at the back. Now, I already mentioned that we have the optional analog clutch paddles here. These can be configured as separate axes, so you can use them as a brake and a throttle if you wish to, or you can map them as a single axis clutch or dual bite point clutch if you want to too, and we'll show you that in the software a little bit later on. Now, these do have a good amount of travel, as you can see here. They do have a nice progressive feel as well, so they do sort of tend to stiffen up a little bit as you pull them in, which gives you a little bit more granular control than something that just sort of feels vague underhand. So if you are the kind of driver that is using these for more precision inputs, then you will find that of benefit. They are using Hall effect sensors on both sides here for contactless operation, so that is a good thing to see. And yeah, you can see the spring-loaded mechanism. This is all aluminium construction. As I mentioned before, you do have the option of upgrading to carbon fiber paddles for the shifters and the clutches if you wish to do so, but it doesn't have any real meaningful impact on the driving experience overall. It is more of a cosmetic change, no real massive impact on the overall weight of the wheel either in regards to that. There is no adjustment available for the shifter paddles. The clutches, however, do have an adjustable throw. You can loosen the little 2mm bolt on either side, or 2mm Allen key bolt, I should say. And then what that'll do is it'll allow you to pivot the back half of this cage here in and out, which will effectively adjust the amount of throw available. Now, unfortunately, they don't include an Allen key to actually do this. And most Allen keys, like my one here that I had in my toolkit, is too fat to actually, or too wide to fit in that gap there. So I would have to actually shave that down or try and find a slimmer one. I did actually go to a hardware store and I could not buy a Allen key that would actually fit in that gap. So it left me a little bit stuck. And unfortunately, you can't just loosen one side and, you know, it doesn't loosen it enough to make the adjustment. So, you know, most other manufacturers these days, even at lower price points than this, are including mounting hardware and all the tools that you're likely to need to make adjustments like this. So I don't really see any excuse why they couldn't just include a 14-cent Allen key to allow you to make that adjustment. Would make life a lot easier, but the adjustment is there if you need it. So then for the shifters, I've got to say these are some of the nicest feeling shifters that I have ever used. They are the exact same shifters, the GSI CEMS NS2 shifters that we find on their much more expensive wheels. The reason I like these so much is they just have such a nice tactile feel to them. You can see obviously they've got neodymium magnets, as you would expect for a wheel of this kind of price point. So you do have a nice solid sort of snap as you activate the shift. But yeah, these shifters just have such a nice feeling to them. No flex there whatsoever. You can pull at any point on the paddles and nothing moves around. But yeah, the amount of throw that you have there is just right. And you know, the way it bounces back is really nice. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard to sort of describe exactly what it is about them. They're relatively quiet as well, which is something that I do appreciate. There is a little rubber bump stop there, but that doesn't have an impact on the feeling of the shifter overall. It doesn't sort of make it feel really cushioned in any way. Just really, really awesome shifters here, other than just lack of adjustability if that's something that bothers you. Now, one thing to note here is they are using automotive grade micro switches here rather than Hall effect sensors. Look, in my opinion, that's not a problem. The argument is always that, you know, any sort of switch or any sort of moving part has the ability to wear out or become faulty over time. Look, I mean, being automotive grade sealed switches, they're not going to take on dirt and debris anyway. And look, I've never had a wheel that uses switches like this that's failed on me in the many years that I've been doing this. So yeah, look, I don't see that to be a problem at all. And yeah, they just have a really, really nice feeling to them overall. You can see all the GSI logos on the back. Let's actually count that quickly. So we've got one logo there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Is that it? Yeah. Oh no, 11. So 11 GSI logos on the wheel, which I do think is a little bit excessive, but again, that's just a subjective thing. So that covers off the shifters and analog paddles if you option for the analog paddles. So let's just quickly talk about the quick release mounting that you see here as well. So this is a standard 70mm bolt pattern on the back here, which means it will be compatible with the majority of quick releases that are out there. Now, just one thing to be aware of is that there isn't a lot of clearance here between the shifters and paddles on the back here and the actual mounting surface. So just be aware of that. The spacer that you see here is actually an optional accessory. So this is the H50 hub, and that comes in at $78 US. So it's effectively just a 50mm spacer, and it is available in a range of different anodized colors: gold, red, black, as you see here, purple, green, and blue. So you do also have the option for a AH100 hub as well, which is a 100mm spacer if you need even more throwback distance. So look, I mean, that may or may not be necessary depending on your particular setup. So just make sure that you do your own research there. And then lastly, just to cover off the connection as well, you can see a nice high quality 4-pin connection here, which connects through to a nice high quality coiled USB cable. Just one thing to be aware of is that there isn't any sort of internal connection here behind the quick release. So if you are wanting to mount this on something like an Acertec base, for example, that does have the facility for internal wiring, so you don't see any wiring at all, you will have to have a cable that runs from here up to the hub. So just be mindful of that. There is no battery or wireless system integrated in this wheel, so you will have to use the cable. And of course, it is only compatible with PC. So with all that said, I think that is everything that you need to know in terms of the physical hardware. Let's now jump onto the PC, take a quick look through the software and some of the things you can do with the lighting, and then we'll get into the driving experience. So let's take a quick look now at the software and configuration side of things, what this thing is actually like to use day to day and set up. So we're going to jump on the Gomez Sim Industries website here. You guys can look at this for yourself. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time getting bogged down here. You don't need to actually buy the wheel to get an understanding of how all this works. So if we go to the setup page here, just click on the setup tab at the top here, scroll down until we find the X-29 wheel, and you can see there's also setup guides for all the other wheels here too, very conveniently placed. And we click on setup. We can then scroll down and it's going to take us through all the essentials for getting one of these guys up and running. So everything from button layouts to mounting on the wheelbase, a couple of warnings here regarding making sure you're using the right types of screws and so forth. So pretty conclusive here, covers pretty much all the stuff that you might need to know. Then we get into the software setup side of things. So downloading SimOS and downloading SimHub. So what you need to understand here is that unlike some other wheels, GSI do rely on SimHub, at least to some extent, to realize the full potential, the full functionality of the wheel. So in the case of this particular wheel, more so with these two guys, but with this particular wheel, if you want to use the RGB backlighting and have it respond to things like button presses, then you are going to need to use SimHub. And the reason I call that out is simply because some other wheels these days have their own software which takes care of all of that. So if anything were to ever happen with SimHub, then you're not going to suddenly find that your wheel doesn't work properly anymore. You can't use the full functionality just because of a third-party piece of software. So we're going to bring up the SimOS software now and just give you a quick run through exactly what this does and doesn't do. Look, it's pretty basic stuff here. We click on the X-29 tab and it's going to take us through all the various different features. So we've got the option here to do a firmware update. Now there is a bit of an issue with the DFU mode or the flash mode on these wheels, including these guys too. If you have Thrustmaster drivers installed on your PC, it can grab that device and then it won't allow you to update the firmware. Now there is actually, if you go into settings, enable third-party driver mitigation switch. I didn't find that it actually worked. I did have to uninstall my Thrustmaster drivers to get the firmware to update regardless of that. So just be mindful of that if you are having issues with the firmware update, but otherwise very simple and straightforward. You just click on update and it basically just runs through it, reboots itself, and it's good to go. So assuming that you've opted for the optional analog paddles on the back of the wheel, you will have the option here to choose between dual clutch, clutch and brake, launch control, button mode, or of course no clutch installed if you don't have them. So dual clutch mode allows you to have one paddle as the master. So you'll pull the paddle, it'll go to 100% clutch. When you release one hand, it's going to go down to wherever you've got your bite point set, and then you can release that to get underway. So it's going to mean that you're going to get the perfect launch depending on the car that you're in every single time. Now you can adjust that bite point, of course, from a slider down here, or you can also press the two top buttons in for 1 second and then rotate, and that will allow you to adjust as well. So you've got a 10% increment adjustment here, you've got a 1% increment adjustment here, and then a 0.1% increment here. Now, because this wheel doesn't have any LEDs on it other than just the buttons, there's no visual representation of the adjustment that you're actually making. So you'd have to have a look at the clutch bar inside the game that you're playing or open this software up to see that adjustment. It would be nice if they had some way. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you could have one LED here per 10% to give you some sort of an indication of whereabouts you were. Maybe you could have it go green or red for 5% increments or something. I think that there are some things that they could do on the wheel to make this a little bit clearer without having to look at the actual clutch value or open up the software. Because in reality, when you're on the grid, you're not going to have time to Alt-Tab out and look at this. You just want to be able to quickly adjust it if you've forgotten. So a little area for improvement there, potentially. Obviously on wheels that have a dash, you've got the option of having it physically display on the dash. But some other wheels that we have tested in the past that do have LEDs on them have some pretty clever ways of displaying this. Then we also have gas and brake mode. So if you wanted to use it as a throttle and a brake, it's basically just mappable as two completely individual axes. Launch control, which works pretty much the same as dual clutch, but automatically detects which one's the master and slave. So when we're in dual clutch mode, we have the option here to choose whether we want right hand or left hand as our master. In launch control, it just kind of automatically detects it. Then we have button mode. So if you want to map the analog paddles as just a physical button or a digital button with no analog axis, you can do that, and then no clutch installed, which is pretty self-explanatory. Adjustment for the bite point there, as we already saw. Then we have a couple of different modes for the encoder. So you'll remember before I mentioned that you can push and hold to engage a second function. So say, for example, if you wanted to have your traction control 2 on the same button as your traction control 1, you could adjust 1 by just turning and adjust 2 by pushing and then turning. So the way that logic works is you've got an on push and an on release function, and you can map different functions to each button using those. We've also got an adjustment here for encoder pulse width too. So that will allow us, if we're finding that when we turn the encoder, it's not quite engaging the function properly, maybe 1 click equals 2 moves inside the game, or maybe you're finding you're having to move it 2 or 3 times to get it to engage once inside the game, you can adjust the pulse width here, and that should account for that. So that's something that I always like to see on high-end wheels. We've got an adjustment here for LED brightness as well, and then you can just manually choose the wheel type if it's detected the wrong wheel for some reason. We've got a wheel tester tab here as well that just allows us to quickly make sure at a glance that all of our buttons are working correctly. So as we push them, it's going to display in the software here. You get the idea. And then a settings tab here as well, which allows us to change themes for the app. So I always prefer dark themes, but you've got a light theme there if you want it. Developer mode, which you're not going to need, and then release channels for firmware too. So if you want to try out beta firmware or beta drivers, you can do that too. And then that third-party driver mitigation thing that we were talking about before. There's also some troubleshooting guides here as well for some of the common issues that you may find. So good that they've got all that there as a reference, so you're not having to hassle them all the time for basic stuff. So yeah, it's just good to see that they've made these incremental improvements over time, but you'll notice that there is no control in this software for the LEDs themselves. So that's where you're going to have to rely on SimHub. So if we jump back onto the website again quickly and click on setup, you can see we've got LED profiles here. We can go down here and we can download gradient profiles for the X-29. So you've got Cool, Warm, Prime, TK, which is a Tony Kanaan edition, and then Miami. Tony Kanaan seems to be everywhere now. But you can download all of those themes and then upload them into SimHub. So if we click on SimHub now and take a look in there, you can see we've got the GSI X-29 selected already. If it wasn't already selected, you would just click on Add New Device and it's going to show up at the top here. Or if it doesn't for some reason, you can scroll through the menu or just search for GSI and you'll find it there. So unlike what it used to be where you'd have to go and manually find profiles and sort of dig around to get things up and running, most new wheels that come out these days have a cooked in profile ready to go in SimHub, provided that you download the latest version of SimHub, of course, and then you can just get up and running that way. So much, much cleaner in general these days than it used to be. So once you've got your wheels selected, all the usual controls here. And again, you can make this as complex or as simple as you want it to be. You can see here we've got that X-29 Miami theme loaded. There is a default profile there that works as well. You can change different colors here. You can also edit the profile, of course. And look, we're not going to go into all the details of how to edit profiles in SimHub because it's the same for pretty much anything that uses SimHub. But the important point here is that you can have the buttons react to different button presses. So when you push the button, it will light up and so forth. You can configure the buttons so they operate as a spotter or show track status or even RPM strip if you wanted to. So there's no end to what you can do there, but the basic profiles here should hopefully have you covered. One thing I did notice is the behavior with the default profiles here does seem to be a little bit strange. And what I mean by that is, you know, when I push the headlight button, both of these are flashing. If I push this one, that one flashes. If I push that one flashes, and then these ones don't do anything. And I did double check and you know, re-download their profiles from their website, upload them into SimHub again. I am running all the latest versions here, including firmware. So all I can think is that maybe the current LED profiles that they've got available for download don't match the latest firmware or something like that. Not 100% certain exactly what's going on there, but it is a relatively easy fix to just go in and adjust the profiles if you wish to do so. And I'm sure that they'll get onto that and fix that relatively soon. But that gives you a basic rundown without getting too much bogged down in the weeds as to how SimHub works. Again, just remembering that you are going to rely on SimHub, which is a third-party piece of software for making sure that you have full functionality with the LEDs, but pretty much everything else with this wheel can all be done through the GSI SimOS software. So I think that's everything you need to know on the software and configuration side. Calibration is all automatic here, so you don't need to worry about anything like that. Let's jump in now and talk about the driving experience. Okay, so what is the driving experience like with the X-29? And look, I mean, there's not a whole lot to cover here that we haven't already covered, just, you know, incidentally through covering off the features here. But I think the things that have stood out to me driving with this wheel over the last couple of months that we've been using it is that, you know, ergonomically, this thing is just absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love the grips. They're just the right thickness for me. I love the grip material as well. It doesn't have that tacky feel as we were talking about before. You know, just whatever you throw at this wheel in terms of, you know, delivering on the core functionality that's most important for sim racing, this thing is just fantastic. Really well weighted, perfect diameter as well at the 290 millimeters, somewhere between, as I said before, 290 and 300 is about what sits right for me. And again, look, a lot of this stuff is very subjective. I absolutely love the shifters that are on this thing as well. I think they're some of the best, if not the best shifters that I've ever tested on any wheel, of course being the same shifters that we find on the much more expensive Hyper P1 and FPE V2 wheels. So again, it just comes back to them having really nailed all of those things that are, you know, fundamentally important for sim racing. I love the RGB backlit buttons as well. I love the fact that they're UV printed rather than stickers, although that may be a deal breaker for some people, not being able to customize the labels on the buttons. As I mentioned in the review, you can swap the physical position positions of the buttons if you want to move one of these to a different position, but you can't just chuck a sticker over it without messing with the backlight. So that's not really advisable. But yeah, look, I mean, the backlight integration, the software integration all through SimHub works well, as you guys saw. I think the standout thing for me really is honestly just how well they've nailed those key fundamentals. So all the buttons are easily reachable. You don't have to take your eyes off the road to make adjustments. And yeah, subjective things aside, I think it's just a really well thought out wheel overall. So with all that said and done, where does this sit in the market in terms of value for money? And look, this is really just going to come down to what you want out of a sim racing wheel. I mean, obviously, as we've already said, if you're just after something that absolutely nails those basics, then this is a really fantastic option. Obviously, you know, at around this kind of price point, you could pick yourself up something like a, you know, a Moser FSR wheel or something like that. That's going to have a lot more functionality, you know, and maybe, you know, scratch that itch if that's something that's important to you. But in terms of the overall look, feel, ergonomics, the quality of the shifters, all those things aren't going to be anywhere near what they are on this wheel. So it really comes down to what's more important to you if you're comparing something that's more feature rich but not as high build quality as something like this. What the wheel that it compares to most closely in terms of core functionality and price point would be something like the F-Core. And look, I really do highly rate this wheel. I thought this was the best value wheel for a very long time until the SimMagic Neo came out, which we'll talk about in just a second. This doesn't have the same level of functionality as this wheel does in terms of things like RGB backlighting. The shifters on this wheel and the analog paddles aren't anywhere near as nice as they are on the X-29. So for me, I would choose the X-29 over the F-Core every day of the week, simply because I think it does a better job of the things that are fundamental to sim racing. That said though, this does have thumb encoders, which I do very much miss on the X-29. I really wish that this did have thumb encoders. That is really the one major complaint that I have with this wheel. If wireless functionality is important to you as well, the F-Core does have Bluetooth connectivity with your PC, so you don't necessarily have to have a cable running back to your PC. You can either run it with a cable using the MagLink connector or just run it off the battery and connect it wirelessly to your PC. So if you don't like having cables, this may be the better option for you, but otherwise, all other things being equal, I would choose the X-29 over the F-Core personally. But really, I mean, out of the wheels that I've tested at least, the F-Core is kind of the only other wheel that comes in at this kind of price point with this kind of feature set. To get this kind of quality in a wheel with a similar feature set, you end up jumping significantly higher in price point to something like the Grid MPX wheel, which does have a lot more thumb encoders, as you can see here. Whether or not that's something that you want is again going to be a subjective thing. It does have buttons on the back here as well. The shifters on this are very good. The analog paddles are very good as well, but not necessarily, I would say, better than what we have here. I actually prefer the shifters on the X-29 to this by a very slim margin. But I mean, you're talking a wheel that costs a lot more here with the Grid MPX than the GSI X-29. And while I do prefer the Grid wheel simply because it does have those extra functions, does have the thumb encoders, personally, I don't think that I could justify the extra cost of this over the X-29 just for those thumb encoders. It just wouldn't make sense for me. You got something like the F64 from Asher Racing as well, or even the McLaren Artura wheel, which is a little bit more closely matched in terms of features. And again, both of these do have thumb encoders, quite similar in build quality. There are a couple of additional features there in terms of things like wireless connectivity. And again, check out the reviews of both of those wheels for all the details there. But the one spanner in the works here though is this guy, the SimMagic Neo. Now this, again, in terms of feature set, is very close. It does have the RPM strip here. It does have thumb encoders, which are of course very useful, as we've covered numerous times now. Look, I mean, the overall fit and finish, the build quality, the switch gear, you know, you've got plastic touch points here. It's nowhere near on the same level as something like the X-29. It feels a lot more like a toy on your rig than something like this does. Now, I mean, look, I wouldn't say that this is a toy-like wheel, but the point I'm trying to make is in comparison to something like this or any of these other wheels that we're looking at, you know, it's not really in the same ballpark, but the price is not in the same ballpark either. This is a lot cheaper than what you're paying for this. It is more feature rich overall. And look, I mean, it does give you all the fundamental things that you need for sim racing. It's good and rigid. The shifters are absolutely fine for the price point. And yeah, look, I mean, really at this kind of price point, at this point in time, out of the things that we've tested, this is really the only other wheel that I would say, you know, maybe you should consider whether or not it's worth paying the extra for something like this over this, when this does do such a good job of nailing all the basics at a very aggressive price point. So that's where I land on it, guys. Am I convinced that you should buy this over something like the SimMagic Neo? Not necessarily, but is it a better value proposition than a lot of those other more expensive wheels that we've looked at? And is it a better value proposition than the F-Core? Again, it's going to come down to whether you need the additional functionality or not. But again, if you just want the basics and you just want a really, really great execution of those basics, then I really don't think that you can go past this wheel. It certainly nails it better than any other wheel that I've tested at this kind of price point. And I really do think it's as simple as that. The only other thing I will mention here, and unfortunately we don't have them here to compare directly, but GSI do also sell versions of these two wheels that don't have the LCD screen in them. They are of course more expensive than this, but they do give you the additional functionality, extra rotary encoders, thumb switches, and so forth. So I'm hoping that I can get my hands on those at some point to test those out for you as well. But I would definitely consider those two. But again, they are more expensive than the X-29. So if this is the limit of your budget, I certainly can't see anybody being disappointed. And I think it's as simple as that, guys. So really hope that today's video has helped you out. Remember those affiliate links and discount codes down in the description box below, or just hit up boostedmedia.net, 5% discount code for GSI, and plenty of other discount codes for other brands as well, including a lot of the brands that we've talked about in today's video. So I really hope that this has helped clarify things for you. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up, leave a comment down below as well. Let us know if it's helped you, and whether you agree with the observations that I've made, or whether you've got experience with any of these products and would like to correct me or add any extra information that you think might be valuable to the sim racing community. But above all, thank you very much for watching, guys. And yeah, I'll see you again very soon. Bye.